Hey guys, welcome back to the garage. Today we're going to be looking at the ignition parts of our Nissan 300ZX. So of course when I got the 300ZX I knew there was going to be some work to be done. So we're going to take a look at all the ignition parts and see what needs to be replaced and see maybe how long it's been since they had been replaced. So because it's in my way, the first thing I'm going to do is remove this tube here. And that's done with two 10 mils, one there and one right there. I'm going to go ahead and take those off, so we can get to the plugs a little easier. There's our wire. We'll go ahead and take that out of the way. Now we can tackle getting the plug out of there. Alright guys, well there's our first spark plug. Looks pretty bad, I'm not gonna lie. Looks very bad. It definitely hasn't been changed in a while. I don't know if this is gonna focus very well, but you can clearly see that these haven't been changed in a really long time. They're pretty rusty and dirty. So I'm gonna go ahead and get all the rest of them out and meet you back here. Okay guys, so I know you can't see that, but this ignition wire was not even connected to cylinder 3. So I'm wondering kind of if that cylinder was ever even firing. You can probably kind of see down there that it's not exactly clean in the cylinder, or in the hole where the plug goes. This definitely wasn't connected, it was just laying on top of the plug, so that would tell me that this cylinder wasn't firing at all. Okay guys, so I got all 6 of the plugs out. Now, you might not be able to tell, but they all look about the same on the tips, which is a good thing. That means the engine collectively is running about the same. The only problem is that all 6 cylinders are clearly burning oil. There's oil collected on every single one of these spark plugs. So we're going to do a compression test to see what the compression is in each cylinder, and then compare it with each other and find out if the rings are worn enough to cause a combustion leak into the crankcase, which would be blow-by, which would cause us to burn oil, which I know it burns oil because I have seen it when I start the vehicle up, and you can also smell it. So we're going to do a compression test on each cylinder, find out what the compression is, and then compare it to the factory service manual and find out what the specification is, and what the difference between cylinders is allowed for the engine to run properly. So this is a compression tester. This item is going to tell us a lot about the health of our engine by telling us how much pressure the cylinder can hold. If the cylinder can't hold pressure, the cylinder can't make power. So we're going to go ahead and test each cylinder, and I'll show you the process of doing that. This is our actual tool here. It's got threads like a spark plug. Every time we test a cylinder, this is going to get threaded into the spark plug hole, just right where we took our spark plug out. And then we connect our tester. It's just like a quick connect on an air hose, right to that. And when we do that, when we crank the engine over with our ignition system disabled, this gauge is going to go up and it's going to stop. And when it stops, that's telling us the maximum pressure that this cylinder can hold. We're going to do that on all 6 cylinders and then compare the difference between them and find out which cylinders are causing the engine to misfire and or to lose power. Okay everybody, so before we go ahead and start cranking, we need to disconnect or disable our ignition system. So we're going to go down here on the right side, would be the driver's side inner fender, and here's your ignition coil. One thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just disconnect the connector to the ignition coil, and then we're also going to disconnect the ignition coil wire from the distributor so that the distributor has absolutely no power. This should be enough here, just disconnecting the actual coil, but this could have residual power, so we're going to go ahead and disconnect that also. Another thing before we do this test, I just wanted to remind you guys also that you need to disable your fuel system too. So in this case, I've just opened my hatch since my fuel connectors are down right here under the rug. I don't have a cover there, so my fuel connections are right there, so I just went ahead and unplugged them, and I turned the key on and verified that there was no more fuel going through the pump. Okay, so we're going to have to screw our tool here into cylinder 1, so we got to go ahead and get a good feel for where we're at down here, see if we can get this thing threaded in where the plug goes. Looks like I'm in there, but I can't really tell. Yep, I'm in there. Okay, so we've got the first one connected. You want to get a good tight seal. You don't need to crazy over tighten it. Alright, so we got a good seal. We can go ahead and now connect our coupler for our tool. Make sure that's a tight connection. And then we're going to lay our compression tester here so that we can see it when we come out. So we'll lay our tester right over here. We'll go ahead and get our keys and start cranking. We'll crank for 3 seconds and then go ahead and stop. Alright guys, so I've got our factory service manual here for our vehicle. We're going to follow the steps of doing a compression test for this vehicle. I've got a copy of the factory service manual that I had a PDF of that I just printed out and bound. And so I've got a copy of all the sections that I found useful. So, step 1 is going to be warm up our engine. We've already done that. I did that earlier before taking any plugs out. Remove all the spark plugs. We've done that. Just tells you the plug size. Attach a compression tester. Tells you how long your compression tester should be. Depress accelerator pedal fully to open the throttle. Crank the engine and read the gauge indication. So, we need to find a way to hold the throttle open, which we can do. And then, so, non-turbo engine, standard. Looks like it's telling us here our scale. So the compression pressure, it tells you kPa is on the left, in quotations is kilograms per centimeter squared, and then psi after the comma. So a standard engine should have, let's see here, 165 psi at 300 RPMs. A non-turbo engine should have 173 psi at 300 RPM. So our engine should have 165 psi per cylinder. So when we come down here to our minimum is 121 at 300 RPMs. So our maximum is 165, our minimum is 121. Anything below 121, that cylinder is not going to be giving enough pressure, holding enough pressure, and will not be equally contributing to the power band. The differential limit between cylinders is going to be 14 psi at 300 RPMs. So 98 kPa if you guys are using kPa. I don't know why you would be, but you guys can see the kPa numbers here. So 14 psi. What that means is each cylinder has to be within 14 psi of each other, or that means they are not contributing properly to the power band or not contributing to the engine's performance. So let's say all of them were 130. That's a good thing. Let's say all but one was let's say 5 of them were 130 and the other one was 120 or 116. That would mean that cylinder is 14 psi low, which would deem it which would deem it technically inoperable, meaning that the cylinder doesn't hold enough pressure to properly run the engine. So let's go ahead and do our compression test and see what our readings are. Okay guys, so we're in the car. We're going to go ahead and crank on cylinder 1 for 3 seconds. Ready? 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, stop. So now we can go check our results. Okay guys, so on cylinder 1, it looks like we had about 140 psi. So each one of these marks is 10. So you've got 90, 100, 110, 120, 130, 140, and 150. Or one mark down from 150, so we've got 140 psi on cylinder 1. Okay guys, so I've made us a sheet here. Our minimum is going to be 121, our maximum is going to be 165. Allowed difference is 14 psi. We're going to go ahead and write down the amount of pressure each cylinder holds, and we're going to hold each crank for 3 seconds, being 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, stop. And then we're going to write down the amount of each cylinder and then compare them to each other to find out whether our engine is going to be safe to run, how it is, or if we need to re-ring and deglaze the cylinder walls. So obviously I've written down 140 psi on cylinder 1. I'm going to go ahead and do the compression test on the rest of these and I'll get back with the results. Okay, so I finished our compression test. Unfortunately, it did very badly. Cylinder 1 had 140 psi, cylinder 2 had 50, cylinder 3 had 60, cylinder 4 had 10, cylinder 5 had 50, cylinder 6 also had 50. I haven't written it down yet. Now this was all a dry test, meaning I didn't put anything in the cylinders. Now I'm going to try a wet test also, which means I'm going to put just a small amount of oil in each cylinder, and then I'm going to redo the compression test. What that will tell me is it will narrow down what is leaking, causing the combustion leak. So cylinder 1, I'm probably going to retest also, but I don't really need to. The rest of them absolutely need a wet test. So what a wet test is going to do is we're going to put oil in the cylinder, and what that's going to do is help the rings seat better and seal off compression gas or air in this aspect. And if that helps bring the compression up to a good PSI, then that means our rings are very worn. So we'll read through this real quick just to give you guys an idea of what I'm talking about. If cylinder compression in one or more cylinders is low, pour a small amount of engine oil into the cylinders through the spark plug holes and retest compression. If adding oil helps the compression pressure, chances are that the piston rings are worn and damaged. If pressure stays low, a valve may be sticking or seating improperly. If cylinder compression in any 2 adjacent cylinders is low, and if adding oil does not help that compression, there is leakage past the gasketed surfaces. So that's pretty much going to tell us what's going on. Right, so I went ahead and did our wet compression test. So let's take a look at our data here. So on the left I've got all the dry results. On the right I've got all the wet results. So cylinder 1 didn't change very much, which means that cylinder's obviously working pretty well. Cylinder 2 came out at 90 from 50. Cylinder 3 came out at 90 from 60. Cylinder 4 came out at 80 from 10. Cylinder 5 came out at 90 from 50. Cylinder 6 came out at 110 from 90. Now, what this tells us is that the rings are not the reason for our compression loss, at least not all of the reason. This is telling us that our heads are pretty much, the valves are not sealing. It could also mean that we have a combustion leak in the gasket, but I don't think that that's the actual reasoning. I think that the heads or the valves are not seating properly. It's pretty common on these engines to do that, especially when people don't take care of them. So what that means for us is that not only are we going to ring this engine, we're going to lap the valves also. Now, if we're going to go ahead and do all those things, we're talking rebuild, because I'm not just going to go in and lap the valves, change the rings, and use all the old parts again. That's just not going to happen, especially if we're putting on boost in this car. So what I'm thinking is we're going to go ahead and just find an engine service near us and have the heads dropped off to have the heads rebuilt, and I'm going to go ahead and do the lower end stuff, so all the main and the rod bearings I'm going to do. All the lower end conversion stuff I'm going to do, and then when we get the heads back, we'll do head studs, better head gaskets, get everything, all the new gaskets replaced, all those kind of things. And then when we get the other engine from the junkyard that I looked at, we'll go ahead and swap all of our turbo items over, get the turbo computer in there, and get it maybe just running, idling, whatever, and then find someone to tune it for us. Now that's a ways off. I'm making it seem a lot, sooner than it really is. I know that. So I think our main thing is for now is we know what kind of engine we're working with, which is what I wanted to accomplish with this. So now that we know what we're working with, we know what we have to do next. So this started out with me just doing a tune-up, but I knew that at some point I was going to have to find out the condition of this engine to be able to use it. So this pretty much answered our question. So unfortunately we won't be able to use it how it is, so we can't just jump into our build, but that's okay because you don't really want to put boost on an engine that's in crippling condition anyway. So we want to start with something new. So I guess our next step is going to be starting to take things apart on the engine, getting everything put out on our workbench, and then I'll get the workbench nice and clean, get our toolboxes moved over, get everything sorted out so that we can start getting the engine taken apart, get the car back in here, and start getting things ready to rebuild and put back in the car. So it's kind of a good thing because I'm going to go ahead and remove the engine, of course, but I'm going to do it piece by piece. So I'm going to get the intake off, the heads off, everything like that first. I'm going to go ahead and lift the engine block by itself out of the engine compartment because it's a little bit easier that way, I think, at least for me. Plus the heads have to come off anyway, so I'm just going to go ahead and start taking the heads off in the car, which really isn't that hard on these cars. Get all my parts laid out on the bench, and then start organizing things and get everything ready to go. And then, while the engine's out of the car and everything's out of the engine bay, we're moving on to paint. I figure it's the best time to do that. While the engine's out, getting the work done on it, I can either drop it off or start painting it myself. I'm not really sure yet what I'm going to do. I'm thinking I'm going to go ahead and paint it myself. I've already looked at some colors, so I'm kind of excited for that. But anyway, guys, I really hope you guys enjoyed this upload. Hopefully we'll see you next time with some better content. This was just kind of like a lazy Saturday upload. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hopefully this was helpful to you guys. And you can maybe now do a compression test of your own and see your own results. I did get this compression tester from Harbor Freight. And I've used it a few times, so I know it's pretty accurate. It works really well. I think I paid $20, and it comes with 3 adapters and the gauge and all that. So if you guys have any questions on how to do a compression test or have any questions on how to do a wet compression test, just leave a question in the comments, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this upload. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time.